Hello there. My name is Jackson, and I am the founder and CEO of Edling. And we are a learning app that's kind of like a TikTok meets Khan Academy. And thanks for joining us today on Entrepreneur Tips, where we pack our episodes full of entrepreneurial stories and learning. And today on the show, we have Brennan Woodruff with us, who is co-founder and chief business officer at GoCharlie. And they are a generative AI marketing tool that helps you write everything from website copy to a successful ad campaign to social media posts for your business. Let's start by learning a little bit more about your background, Brennan. What experiences led you here prior to GoCharlie?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jackson. It's been quite the journey to get here, to be honest. And I think it starts a little bit further back than what pretty much most people think about entrepreneurial journeys. So both of my parents, I'm from a small place called Evansville, Indiana. So any Hoosiers that might be listening to this, let's go. We're dancing in March, so it's good. But both of my parents were entrepreneurs themselves. So my dad is a real estate appraiser, and my mom is a professional painter, so paints the interior of folks' homes. And I think there was always just in my head like an entrepreneurial bug, but for better or for worse, I was just a little too chicken to pursue it. And then, I hate to give even any one thing credit, but the real switch that flipped, I think, during the pandemic is I did this program called the Morning Brew Accelerator. And I was, Morning Brew is a newsletter for those that don't know, but it's actually like a media company. And so they
Love that.
learning. So the accelerator at that time is the very first one that they ran, and it was all focused on upskilling in a digital age so that your skills were refreshed with what was common practice out there. Anything from communications to strategy to proper channels that you should be thinking about growing on. And so that was super useful. But what I found is when I was, you do a lot of team-based work. And so all my teammates were founders. And all of them, it seemed like I was every bit as capable as them. And it made me realize that they were just willing to take that risk. They took the idea that they had in their head and they put it into practice in their brain. And so for me, I think that was really the catalyst to be like, all right, cool, it's time to go take a shot here. I wouldn't say that the environment has been the best for entrepreneurship, but I do think that, for better or for worse, I feel a lot more fulfilled with my work than I did previously. So I would say it's a collection of genes and finally getting off my butt to say, hey, I want to try this and see what happens.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have had that experience of we have ideas, right? And there's just that moment where it's like, man, I think it would be really hard to start this. Maybe I'm going to wait a little longer. And it is a really scary but good feeling to say, okay, finally, I'm going to go and I'm going to jump in and I'm going to do this. So, great segue into, can you tell us a little bit about, when you decided to do that for GoCharlie? Like, what was the story there and how did you get there?
Yeah, so GoCharlie was not the original idea I wanted to jump into. So let me be clear out there. Not every idea is one that maybe you should jump into, but more power to the people that are just churn and burn on ideas. And I will also say that the adage that is like ideas are everywhere, execution is a differentiator. I have learned that more times in the past year and a half than I ever wanted to learn that lesson. So heed that adage. There's a reason people say it. So my first idea I actually made in that Morning Brew program was called Rockchain.
Sure.
I still think that business may work, but effectively it was a play on creators having their own cryptocurrency token, and then on the back end you had what Royal.io is now built, which is basically digital Bowie bonds for investing in music royalty rights.
Sure.
Really cool idea, Web3 enabled, very timely at that time for some investments we were looking at when I was in SoftBank. And then I called up my buddy that had done a crypto company, and he said, hey, that sounds really hard. What do you know about generative AI? And at that point, he had, unbeknownst to me, been consulting his buddy, Kostas, who founded this company. He was like, hey, just have a chat with him, see what he thinks. If you like the idea, then you guys can go play. I talked to him. I saw the potential for this generative AI technology. This was early 2021.
Yeah, it's
And
a
then
hot button issue right now.
yeah, and so now it's hot. So that's another thing for the people listening at home. Like, just because an idea doesn't seem like it's going to explode right whenever you join, it could take off in a weird way that you may not have thought about. There's a number of startups that were AI startups that have now taken off as a result of generative AI. But that's really what got me to join in. And what really sold me, I think, was the potential to change people's lives for the better. There's a lot of talk out there about AI kind of ruining jobs, AI automating people's jobs away. I view AI slightly differently. Obviously, there's a little bias here, but I view it as like the arbiter of a creative renaissance. If you want to dumb that down into like a little bit more layman's terms, I view it as an enabler of what you're inherently capable of. So the AI is really only going to be able to take what you give it and turn it into something. And so for me, I know personally, whether it's a new diet, new workout regimen, new project, new newsletter, anything that I want to do, getting over that first hurdle of getting started, it's the biggest thing. And if I knew that I had a partner in that, then my likelihood of succeeding and finishing is much higher. And so AI, I look as that collaborative partner. The reason we focus on marketing is because everybody's got the problem of marketing. Everybody needs to grow their business somehow. And so that felt like the best problem to focus on that would enable people to be successful as a result of our product. Long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I love how, started as a blockchain and then ended up in a generative AI before it was hot.
Started on the chain, now we're here. Yeah, the Drake remix, no one needed.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's awesome. Thanks for the story. And let's move on into sort of the meat and potatoes of this, which is we're going to go through 4 different topic areas and hopefully talk a little bit about some lessons you've learned as you've, built GoCharlie and as you've learned up to get ready to build GoCharlie. So those kind of 4 topic areas we're going to go through include finding customers, raising funds, team, and then we'll talk a little bit about imposter syndrome and leadership at the end there. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with finding customers. So that 0 to 1 problem. As you were starting out with GoCharlie, how did you think about finding your first customers?
Yeah, so a part that's often overlooked with finding your first customers and making sure you know who your customer is. Sure. So there's a myriad of different ways you can start a startup. I think right now in a technology-driven age, many tech startups just build a really cool technology with an assumption of who would use it. And I think that that's probably the wrong way to go about it, but it's not entirely wrong. It just makes it a lot more difficult for determining who is my customer. So if you're going to go that route, just make sure that you have really good ways of tracking who is actually using your product. But once you have an idea of who that customer is, going and finding them is a separate issue. And so for us, we started out with an understanding of our technology and who we thought would be our customer. Now, we then had to go through the exercise of, well, where do these customers live? So for instance, our tool is very good at copywriting. So we started to think, well, where are people writing copy? And so that was Facebook, emails, websites, all those things. Okay, well, that's where they're writing the copy, but is that where their eyes are? Where did they go for tools? And so that led us to finding newsletters that people in the marketing industry would read. That led us to productivity gain newsletters for entrepreneurs. That led us to what eventually was AppSumo. And so AppSumo for us was a very low-risk way to get an MVP out there, get a whole bunch of feedback, and get some early people to buy. AppSumo kind of took care of some of that lead generation for us by categorizing us in with different products that had previously been on the site. So if you're really struggling, I would say just go where people that you think would be your customer, go for their information. If you're really uncertain of where that might be, or you have none of those people in your network, then go to a platform where they can help do a little bit of that work for you. Me personally, I'm a finance guy, so finding marketers was a little bit more difficult. I didn't work with the marketers too often in my finance roles. It just wasn't part of the interaction at any of those companies. So if you have people in your network, my best advice would be start there, because they're more willing to want to see you succeed and give it to you directly in terms of feedback.
Sure. So yeah, that's a great story of your guys' journey so far, are there any maybe frameworks or key principles that new founders should think about when they are planning to find that first customer? Like, you mentioned, like, if you're not exactly sure where to go, you could find someone who can help you to find those first customers,
Yep.
right? How should entrepreneurs be thinking about building that strategy in the beginning?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it gets back to just who your target or ideal customer would be. Spending the time up front to figure that out makes every part of that life easier. And so when you define that ICP, we just have started massaging things a little bit on our own, but like thinking about what is the role title of that person. And then if you have at least an idea or maybe 5 sets of who that might be in terms of role title, you can just go to LinkedIn, search for those people, and again, reach out to the people that are closest to you first, and then expand out to second degree connections, third degree connections. So I think it's all about investing the time to get clear on who that customer is and getting super intimate with who they would be. So like, for instance, if you are looking at enterprise marketers may have a content management system that they're already using. So the product features that they need might be something that fits into that existing system. Whereas a smaller business with a marketer may not have a content management system. And so they may find value in having something that could distribute the content as well as creating it. So if the more intimate and the more detail driven you can get around that ICP, the easier it is to go to platforms like LinkedIn and figure that out.
Yeah. And so once you're on your LinkedIn, you found your enterprise marketer, what's that first sort of thing that you need to do when you encounter that customer? What are the tips to ensure that you successfully convert that customer and make sure they have that strong experience, or at least learn for the next time, when you encounter that next customer?
Yeah. So this is going to be a bit contrary to what you might think, but I would say your first interaction with that potential customer shouldn't be about your product, and it shouldn't be about solving their problem. It should be, hey, I'm working on this thing. Could I get 10 to 15 minutes of your time, or could I give you access to the product and just see what you think and what you might change? You're probably not going to get a response on a lot of those, but the responses that you do get are your potential future customers. So you're effectively creating some scarcity, saying that this is something new. Everybody likes something new. Everybody wants to test something new that's not on the market. It's like knowing the band before the band was a band. And so they want to participate. But if you come saying, hey, I got this cool product, will you pay me for it? You're going to turn people off pretty quickly. But if you give them this chance to participate in the development of something new and unique in a way that may even set them up to solve their problem on a personal basis for them, people tend to be a lot more responsive. Plus, there's no downside. There's only upside for them in that. So I would say that the way to think about it is, don't look to make them a customer. Look to make them a brand advocate or a brand ally or a development ally, and give you useful feedback for making sure that when you come out of the gate, you might be able to convert them to a revenue-paying customer.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And yeah, I love what you're saying around ownership, which is like, hey, this is someone who is not just like going to be paying for something in the future. Like, they might be someone who tells 10 additional people.
Yeah, that was a huge thing for like random story, but just to show you guys how applicable this can be. I reached out, or I put something on LinkedIn saying, hey, I'm looking for digital marketers to try a new product that we're developing. It's absolutely free. My fraternity brother that saw it on LinkedIn, he's not a marketer, but you know who is? His new wife. And his new wife then referred us out to all of his network, or all of her network, that also worked in digital marketing. Someone that I didn't even know that I had connections to then made this springboard. And so it's all, if you put it out there as a, hey, I don't need people to pay me, it's more so I just need help thinking through this thing, you're a lot more likely to get people to participate because it's a low barrier to them actually trying to help you.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Love that. So a lot of people will say that, wow, I wish I could build this thing, but the one thing I need is I need some money. So let's switch over and start talking about startup capital. So I'm curious to hear your story about what are the various ways, or maybe the one way, I'm not sure, that GoCharlie was able to sort of get off the ground by raising capital? Like, did you bootstrap it all? Did you have friends and family or angels or accelerators? How did you approach this problem?
So there's a number of different ways, but I'll talk to our ways and try to drop anecdotal, actionable items here. So we did do a friends and family round to start. So I would say with any project, if you can, start with friends and family. So that's what we did. We created a pitch deck. Costas, the CEO, has some folks in his network that were able to invest. And then I had some friends and family friends that were willing to bet on me. Coming out of SoftBank to start this small little upstart company called GoCharlie.ai. So we started with friends and family. Now, there's a lot of stuff you can do at that stage of the company that's really going to screw you up later. So a really helpful resource for this is AngelList. So AngelList has what's called a roll-up vehicle, which allows you to make a entity that all of your angels who are accredited, make sure that you understand accreditation requirements. So if you're going to get checks from angels, they can invest into this one vehicle, and that one vehicle then invests in the company. So then you have one line item for all these angel investors that put money into the company. So that makes your life easier, plus there's additional filing requirements. Then what I did from the friends and family network, I was like, well, what other networks am I a part of? So that led me to Indiana University's ventures team. So they have an angel network there, as well as their own venture arm that invests in Hoosier-backed companies. So that was the second wave of funding that we then brought in. And then once we were there, we had a little bit more product traction, had a little bit more revenue. That's when we started to look for accelerators that were more institutional capital, give us some credentials behind what we've built, behind our expertise. And then from there, that's when we started going out to the institutional VCs. So going out for the larger pre-seed round. So I would say it happens in stages. Any of you entrepreneurs that are looking to fundraise, don't get caught up in like, what stage are we, what stage or series of investment this is. Pre-seed and seed don't really mean the same things that they used to. When I was at SoftBank, I saw billions of dollars go out the door for Series A and for Series E. Like, it doesn't really matter what the series is. The series are typically supposed to indicate the stage the company is at. Everybody has different definitions for it. The other thing that I would advise you is that it's not going to be a linear process. It's just not. 2022 was a very difficult fundraising environment. 2023 probably going to be a difficult fundraising environment. But the best thing I can tell you is that when you're in it, it doesn't feel linear. But when you look back at it, it will look linear. It's just that's just the nature of the beast. That you have variations, but the trends show you going up and to the right.
So let's say you're a new entrepreneur and you're thinking about, whether or not you should, bootstrap versus fundraise. How should someone who's not even sure if they should raise funds figure out if they should raise funds?
Yeah. So I think the first place that you got to start is like, is this problem actually a problem? Right. So like some founders are lucky and they personally experience a problem, and they're like, there's got to be many more of me out there that are experiencing this problem. So they've solved for a market of one themselves, and so they know it's a problem. So then once you've identified it's a problem, you got to go out there and say, well, how big of a problem is this? And so in my mind, if venture scalable or venture backable companies are really focused on taking, would say $100 and turning that into thousands of dollars. And so if you don't feel that there's a big enough market opportunity where you could have thousands and millions and billions of users eventually, that may not be a venture backable company. So you really have to think about, what is the problem that I have? How big is that problem? And that gives you the basis from which to have a market opportunity to address. Now, I would say to anyone, try to bootstrap if you can. It's a better way. You're more in control. You're less accountable to outside parties, which we'll get into whether or not that's a good thing later. I find that that's better and easier to say when you have a massive network, you're already established, you're building in a field that you have expertise in. It's not ideal. It's not possible for many. I mean, we have a consumer debt crisis going on. We have all these things where money is becoming less valuable. So for those people that don't have a network and where they're building and don't have necessarily the capital on hand themselves to be able to fund operations a little bit, or for many people, also a friends and family network that's accredited and can give them money, I would say then maybe consider VC. But I think VC has been this amorphous blob where like everybody assumes that anyone that gives you money is a VC. And so I want to make a clear delineation that like venture capital is more, I'm trying to get you from $100 to like tens of thousands of dollars. There's a bunch of things in between your friend giving you money and venture capital that you can consider. If you're operating an e-commerce shop, you do not need venture capital unless it's like the coolest product ever known to man. You can get away with, hey, I'm just selling a product through Shopify. I need some operating cash. You can go to a bank and get something like that. You can use credit cards for something like that. You don't need to go get venture capital if you're a one-man shop. It's just I would not advise that. So
they're not the gatekeepers to entrepreneurship.
Exactly. Yes, that's a fantastic way of putting it. So I would say to the extent that you can leverage your existing network, do so. Exceptions that I've seen in this industry that we're in is that we have 2 AI PhDs and they're well documented in terms of their contributions to the field. Where they're not well documented and where I am not well documented is the field of entrepreneurship, of creating startups.
Yeah.
And so in those cases, when you're a first-time founder, there is some big benefit to getting more logos on your company webpage, more logos on your Crunchbase profile, more logos on your customer base. And then you can start to use their resources to get access to networks that you wouldn't have previously gotten to. So for me, the biggest part of fundraising is, yes, it's capital. That's a huge benefit, but it's a network that is coming with that capital that you should be thinking about. One of the biggest problems I think we made in our early days was we waited for more venture capital to get in before we took action. I think we realized this is going to be a difficult fundraising environment and just started building. And after that, things started moving. So it's really a matter of like timing. If you see the opportunity slipping away, so for us, like AI, we felt that there was 2 to 5 years where AI is going to become part of your workflow. So like we wanted to get money to pour gasoline on the fire to really grow this thing and execute on that opportunity. But for some people that aren't in tech, maybe that opportunity is still going to be there if you wait a little bit. But
yeah,
I find the longer you wait to execute on an idea, the less likely anything is going to actually happen.
Yeah, wonderful. So I would love to also drill into sort of the VC part of your story specifically at Charlie. So it's not an easy environment to raise funds, out there right now. When you were first looking at, VC fundraising, I think you guys raised from, was it Goodwater Capital? Is that correct?
Yeah.
How did you set up that process? Like, what were the steps that you took?
Yeah. So this kind of ties back to your network, right? So previously in my days at SoftBank, I was working with someone that has now moved on as a partner at Goodwater Capital. And so I kind of just kept up with him every now and again, shooting messages or sharing something that I thought was interesting. And eventually I got to a spot where I was like, hey, we're actually doing pretty well here. Why don't I touch base with him, see if we can work together? And ended up right environment, right timing, and we made it happen. I think the lesson from that story isn't necessarily you can only raise if you have a network. It's more so, don't view investors as this transactional relationship.
Sure.
And if you know you're not going to be able to raise from someone, create a relationship early. Because let's say you're a small startup, but you have a great idea and you get it out there and you're seeing some initial traction. And you're like, well, I don't need $25 million today. But then all of a sudden I got this feature in like Oprah's magazine or something like that. And this product takes off. It just goes bananas. And you've just closed a $5 million raise. You got that in the bank, but you have to fund operations and scale really quickly to deal with this new interest. You want to have had a relationship with that person that can write you the $25 million check so that when the time comes that you need it, that process is fast. So like, I already know this person. I don't have to go do the references.
Sure.
I can sit there and I can say, I just need to do some checks on the business. Fundraising isn't hey, we have one conversation, we write you a check. Some people are, that's crazy. That's not the norm. But for the most part, you really want a relationship established. And so with Goodwater, that's what I did. I was talking and communicating with a friend. And then when we finally got things move a little bit further along, it was like, okay, cool. Now it's our time to come in and participate. And so that's kind of the process that you have to think about is have an idea of the type of company you are, have an idea of the types of customers and problems that you're going to deal with, and then identify who would be helpful or who has experience in dealing with companies like that, and dealing with problems like those, and then start to establish those relationships early.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And so, okay, you told this great this great story of how you got involved with Goodwater.
Good.
I'm curious, for someone who is having those first conversations, like what does a get to know you conversation look like, first of all? And then, let's say you're starting from scratch. Uh, what are the things that someone who's never raised before needs to learn up on and do to conduct that successful raise? So we talked about relationships being important. What else?
Well, first, I would encourage everybody to read a book called Venture Deals.
Yep.
For the unanointed, even myself, I read through it before I joined this company. Most of my time was spent in late stage, and there's a lot more nuance to early stage things that can really screw you. So read that book. Gives you kind of good practices for thinking about how to communicate with investors, NDA best practices, all sorts of fun. Just a very immensely dense and helpful book for fundraising. Now, that being said, if you're starting from scratch, right? So you're starting, no one really knows who you are. The VCs that you want to target don't know who you are. The worst thing you can do is probably just go straight to their inbox and be like, hey, I got this really awesome company. Will you invest? The best thing that you can do, in my mind, is go to as many pitch competitions as you can, virtually or in person, and just get your name out there, get used to pitching, and then start to win over the audience, listen to their feedback, and adapt your pitch. Once you went to a critical mass of those, you will likely start getting inbound of investors that want you, right? You're going to start to get inbound of people that want to invest in you. And if you don't, then that just means that you have to continue refining your pitch. Once you've been to a bunch of those, what typically happens is I would try to advise companies, get heat on the deal. And what I mean by that is let's say that you're raising a pre-seed round. Find some strategic angels that maybe have experience or have access to these funds. Find some scouts of the funds that you like that might be looking around for potential investment. Get those angels to invest a little bit of capital where it takes some of the round off the table, and that will start to snowball into more investors wanting to participate in the round. Perfect example would be once we got XRC as well as Goodwater on our cap table, the conversations that we were having moved from a analyst just doing a review of the space to partners being interested in seeing what we had going on and wanting to have a more robust conversation. So I would say start with just getting yourself out there any way you can with your pitch, and then continue to take that into angel conversations to get some heat on the deal, and then go get the big fish from there. I would say cold outreach works, but it rarely works if you are nowhere and no one knows who you are. The only time that ever really works is if you're a repeat founder. And if you're a repeat founder and you're cold emailing someone that you don't know, that might be a red flag as well. So just be very tactful.
Any thoughts on the time scale for this? I know typically you hear oh, give yourself 6 months. Any thoughts on how long should you be aiming for? And is the 6 months really the adage, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, you can close in 3 months. I don't think that's the world we live in right now. My best advice on timing of a round is the more time you spend up front identifying exactly the amount you need and what you're going to use it for, and more importantly to investors, what will be achieved with that money, the easier those conversations become. Now, I know people that started raising in January of 2022. It's March 23. They still haven't closed their round. That is abnormal. That to me says that there's a big problem. But that's the nature of the beast of 2022 fundraising. Timetables don't make sense. So I would allow yourself 3 to 6 months, but I would do everything possible to install a backstop where it's if an investor can't give you an answer by then, they're out. It's kind of like dating. It's if there's uncertainty at some point in the relationship at a certain amount of time in, that may mean it's time to go. So I would say a backstop of 3 to 6 months is what you should allot for, but have a general buy date where you're just okay, we're just going to do it with the capital that we have and we'll be done. Just be prepared for that.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, definitely one of those things where the market's going to play in a little bit to any sort of equation that you're thinking of here. Maybe it's maybe you have to come up with those contingency plans where what's going to happen if we do have to bootstrap and stay alive on are we the term I remember from this is, are we default alive or are we default dead? As in, if we don't take any capital, will we survive it or will we actually die? And so that is an interesting thing to maybe think about as you're moving forward. But yeah, thanks so much for taking us through the VC side of things. So once you do get a little bit of capital, then you get obviously to the fun part, which is hopefully you can start spending on various different pieces of the business. One of the things that we wanted to talk about on this call was, let's talk a little bit about team. So can you tell me a little bit about like what was the first iteration of building your team like for GoCharlie? Like how early did your team find each other? We obviously heard the story of you being introduced to your co-founder earlier in the conversation. Was it all co-founders at first? Did you have consultants? Did you have any employees? I would love to hear just that story.
Yeah. So I'll start with like the full story, but thinking about team building, I think is an extension of that. But so Kostas and I met over a phone call. He had been tinkering with generative AI even since 2016.
Wow.
Had been dealing with it more from a quantitative prediction space, but for anyone that knows how current transformer models work, they're really just highly educated prediction models. They're not intelligent per se. It's a whole separate conversation. I'll let you guys figure that one out on your own.
Are they alive?
And so he met Despina, who's our chief AI scientist. She's a Wonder Woman. She was a PhD as well. And so they met through like a Greek AI network. And then they were in the Alchemist Accelerator. The Alchemist Accelerator was where I was an advisor at the time. And then I liked the company. I liked the team because they were very, very technical. I felt they could build world-changing products. But the one thing that we were missing was someone to make AI models interactable. As you see with ChatGPT now, like the way that you interact with a model is very important to its adoption cycle. ChatGPT's genius was that it was really easy to use. And so that's where we found Ryan Carlton, our CTO. And so he was able to stand up an MVP of our first product in about a week, which was incredible. And so like when you think about building your teams, I think you have to think about where do my weaknesses and strengths lie as an individual. But an often overlooked conversation that needs to happen, I think, is what are people looking to get out of this experience? And more importantly, what do they want this to become? And what I mean by that is some founders will want to build a lifestyle business.
Okay.
And they want to have a family and they want to do, certain things where their day-to-day isn't entirely work. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's one type of business. There's another type of person that wants to create a unicorn. And, it may have seemed easy to create a unicorn with all the crap that was happening the last 10 years from 2011 to 2021. My previous employer was responsible for much of that. But it's not. It's really, really hard, and it will demand the world of you. And you have to know that you have people on your team that will run through walls if that's really what you want to do. And so I think having those conversations up front about like the lifestyle that you want from that business, how big of a company you want to build, and then making sure that you have the requisite expertise for building that company that you want to build. I think that's the way that I thought about it. And then the fourth part on team, I think is just, do I like these people? Like, regardless if you're going to build a lifestyle business, regardless if you're going to build a unicorn, like I think even if you don't want to spend every single waking minute with these people, you have to like them enough to be willing to go to bat. And I think like also has an embedded level of respect. You have to respect this team, because if you don't respect one another, when you come to disagreements, it'll get personal really fast. I think you have to respect that everybody on the team is very much learning, but also very much an expert in what they do. So for me, it was making sure that we were aligned, making sure that we had the requisite skill sets to build, and making sure that that we enjoyed spending time with one another. And fortunately, I got really lucky that that's the case with this team.
So you have 5 members of the team currently, is that correct?
Four members.
4 members.
Important, yes. Important point you mentioned earlier is consultants are also part of that.
Mhm.
I would say investors also very much part of your team. Often overlooked part of your team, early customers. I still have Facebook chats with early customers all the time with giving me ideas, giving me thoughts, coming to me asking questions. If you lose that, like that sucks because that's the
Yeah.
whole fun of this business. But they're very much part of your team, your early betters.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so you mentioned a little bit before we spoke about this idea of being a virtual team versus being in person. So I would love to discuss for a little bit how did Charlie think about that decision? How did you figure out whether or not you're gonna go for office or go virtual? So let's start there.
So I think what it all boils down to is trust. Um, Remote work it's not a new concept, but it being available to the entire team is a new concept. The pandemic made it that way. And so for us, like that was just the nature of the beast. We were geographically dispersed, but we all had a common idea and a common goal. And so we kept with that. Most of our team had worked in a remote environment for 2 years, and so it wasn't really a change there. I don't think that we'll be remote forever. I think we will have some sort of hybridized model, if I have it my way, where the team will centralize around one hub, and they will come in and out, especially as we expand across the country and internationally. We'll have to have those sorts of hubs. But thinking more tangibly about the decision for us, it was more so just a necessity. But I think remote teams have to be, one, very trusting of one another, because if shit goes sideways, you will start to point fingers very quickly if you don't trust that everybody's working all the time. And part of that trust is the most important part of any startup, which is communication. And I think I've been in employers where we worked remote and communication wasn't part of it, but you almost have to over communicate. Anytime there's a big issue that is company impacting, you have to think about communicating not only with your team, but then with your investors, and then even with your customers. This Silicon Valley Bank thing collapse, perfect example of that. I'm the finance guy, so I talked to the team. I'm like, hey, this is happening with Silicon Valley Bank. And then it's like, oh crap, they collapsed. And then I had to write up to the team saying, hey, and even though I was sitting next to the team, I was sitting next to the team in person when we look right now, I was still like, I'm writing this all down so you guys have comfort of what's going on and understand exactly what we're doing, how this impacts us, if at all. And then I was like, all right, next part of the team, investors. And then next part of the team, customers.
Yeah.
And so you have to think about communicating almost more than what you want to typically in a remote-based environment.
Yeah. So if you don't get to see that, team all the time in person, how do you suggest building that trust from day one?
It's a great question. I haven't had anyone ask it that way before. For us, it's meant meeting as a team in person once a quarter.
Yeah.
So I would say it's kind of like a long distance relationship in that aspect. Like you shouldn't leave your last in-person meeting without an idea of when the next in-person meeting is going to be. You need to give that continuity to that person. I think the second thing is that we just ship so fast. Like when we are on it, we are just like our November month was our highest grossing revenue month. We launched 40 new features.
Wow.
40 new features in 1 month. And that's with one like production level software engineer. The other two are AI folks, and I'm the business guy. So like that is impossible. Like the output that we have for our stage of company and the amount of people we have is insane.
Right.
And I think that builds trust in my mind. Not necessarily shipping, but seeing that the team can move at that breakneck speed when given the right direction. That has built trust in me. And then I think the last piece of building that trust is having one-on-one sessions. So this was super. I didn't do this before Uber. Uber was my previous employer before SoftBank. I didn't do it until Uber, but I realized that the whole point of one-on-ones isn't to get work done. It's to establish trust. It's to feel that there's an open area to have conversation. So for me, like I went to Tomorrowland with our CTO. I went to a conference with our chief AI scientist. I got to teach at NYU with our chief AI scientist. I got to take our chief AI scientist to her first Cracker Barrel experience. And so like, I do think that some of the trust was built by just being in person with people. So even if you're a remote team and you plan to be remote forever, having on-sites as a team is critical to building trust.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, nothing will build trust like going to that sort of a concert together, right?
Exactly.
You maybe each have a little bit of dirt on the other too after that.
I'm sure you've got some funny photos of me, that's for sure. It's not easy. I will just to put it plain and simple. There might be people where it's already easy for them, but I will guarantee you that like that was usually the result of some hard work that happened previously. Um, Entrepreneurship is one of the most rewarding and one of the most challenging experiences in that regard. It will make you question everything that you know. In fact, there was a quote that I take from an interview I had before I joined GoCharlie, and man, I wish I could credit this guy with the quote, but he said that entrepreneurship is a journey of self-actualization. And so, like, if you're a first-time entrepreneur, every single thing that you think is bad with you or is difficult with you is going to come out in your work product. Because we as humans, when we get insecure, we kind of resort to some bad habits. So for me personally, I think what I'm working on right now, and I think every entrepreneur is like working with integrity. And so what that means is like, when you say you're going to do something, do it. When you say you're going to do something for yourself that's not work related, definitely make sure you do it, because you have to have integrity with yourself before you can have it with others. And then I think on top of that is like, inherently know that there's always going to be ups and downs. Try not to get on the roller coaster. Try not to take it too personally. Inevitably you will. But the more you get on the roller coaster, the harder it is for you to get off. And so you got to have kind of that even keel, set up your rituals, set up those things that kind of take you away from the screens. But more importantly, make sure that you're finding ways to feel secure about yourself. Because I know me personally, I've become self-aware that like if stuff is really going sideways, one of my bad habits was to like point fingers externally instead of looking internally and saying, hey, what was my role? And in that, I was giving away the control that I had over being present in that situation. And I know that's kind of like going all over the place, but the point I'm trying to get to is you have to be responsible for yourself. And the roller coaster is something that you can't control, but what you can control is how you're reacting and how you're showing up. I think the other piece that I would try to advise to people is like, try to keep calm. It's inevitably you will. Try to keep calm. There will be stuff where it's like appropriate to freak out, and that needs to happen. But you have to trust that everybody's trying their hardest. And so that self-mastery is just really an exercise of you saying, who do I want to be here? What am I aiming to get? And making sure that you're enabling yourself to do those things by spending the time you need for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important to figure out. So, I mean, before I applied to business school, for example, I don't know if I had really solidified in my mind, like, what are my values? What are the things that I need to work on? I remember through a couple of exercises in business school, I had the opportunity to kind of ask people who had worked with me, like, what are my skills? What am I really good at? And that really helped me solidify, okay, here's the areas that I need to work on. So it is so important to sort of self-identify and be able to move forward with that. So, but I guess the next thing I wanted to talk a little bit more about is imposter syndrome. You know, it is really easy for you to say like, hey, I have these things that are wrong with me, so maybe I'm not good enough. How does it present itself for you, and what do you do to ensure that it doesn't get in the way of making your company successful?
Oh man. Yeah.
Big, just a small question.
Yeah, just a small one. It's fascinating because on the flip side of imposter syndrome is like naivety, I would say.
Yeah.
So I think when I jumped into this entrepreneurial journey, I was very naively optimistic. I was like, oh, I got this. I can figure this out. I can kick ass at this. This is no problem. People are raising billions of dollars. Like, I could totally raise a couple $1 million. And then I got into it. And man, the curse of knowledge slapped me in the face with imposter syndrome. Like, there were so many things where I was like, oh, but this seems so easy for this app. And then I look at our app and I'm like, oh, that's why it's so hard.
Sure.
And I think for me personally, imposter syndrome shows up in a couple ways. One is that I'm a non-technical founder in a very technical type product. And so figuring out the technicalities behind it has been a continuous journey for me. So I notice that it comes up when it gets anything technical, I tend to shy away from it. But the way that I would tell people to approach imposter syndrome is like, once you become self-aware enough to understand why you're feeling it, so spend some time, figure out why you're feeling it, then you can address it. So for me, that means spending more time with my AI team, understanding why these AI models work or what their inherent limitations are. It means spending more time with my CTO to figure out why the authentication doesn't work for the magic link that I want to send. It means spending more time trying to figure out, well, why can't we just launch this tomorrow if it's ready in dev? Like, all of these things are things that you spend time on. Now, I'm not saying that will solve imposter syndrome, but the way I deal with it is either get knowledgeable on what's really driving it, or I just say, look, I have different skills. I'm not going to be the best technical person, but I will be the more entertaining person talking about it. That is one thing I know I have. I have showmanship. And so it's like, there's a lot of people that are technical that wish they had showmanship. There's a lot of people that have showmanship that wish they had technical. And so everybody's in this room of people thinking they have imposter syndrome. They're not good enough. And it's like, no, you're just really good at the thing that you do. You're really good at you. So my best advice to imposter syndrome is like, it's going to come up. So just try to be aware of why. And from there, you can usually get to the bottom of it. Not saying you'll solve it completely, but some of the best people in the world still experience imposter syndrome. So nobody's got it all figured out.
Yeah, there's definitely a long list of CEOs that have said they didn't feel good enough at the beginning, right? So definitely don't let it get in the way of pursuing the things that you really want to do if entrepreneurship is something you want to do. So fantastic. Thanks so much for covering all 4 of those topics now. The last thing that I wanted to do before we jump off is you sent me a quote here. And so I'm going to read the quote for everybody. And I would love to just hear, what does the quote mean to you as a founder? So the quote was, "But if few understand that building is a great symbol we live in our minds, and existence is the attempt to bring that life into physical reality, to state it in gesture and form. For the man who understands this, a house he owns is a statement of his life." So that was a quote from a book called The Fountainhead. The Fountainhead.
Yep.
Ayn Rand, if I'm saying that right.
Yep.
So what does that quote mean to you?
Yeah. So to be fair, that book is a little bit problematic. It's polarizing for some people. So I cherry picked that quote. So what it means. So a little bit of backstory about the whole quote there. So the guy that says that quote is an architect, and so an architect's life is about envisioning something in their head and then bringing it into physical reality through their sketches, through their designs, and then ultimately the construction. And I think that myself personally, I wanted to be an architect before I went into finance. And I think a lot of that is because I had this inclination to build. I had things in my mind and I wanted to make them a reality. And I think entrepreneurship has a lot of parallels to that quote. Entrepreneurship is being just crazy enough to have this idea in your head that you want to bring into the world, to think that this idea will make the world better. And so for me, that's what I take away from that quote. I think that entrepreneurship, or maybe even life as you know it, is a vision that you have in your mind that you're trying to bring into physical existence. Maybe your goal is to have a family. Maybe your goal is to build your own house. Maybe your goal is to create a product. Maybe your goal is to sit on a beach. All of that is a vision that started in here that you want to bring here. And so that's why I love that quote. It takes you from thinking of, hey, my ideas, I want to be a reality. Now we can debate what reality means, but that's the way that I like to think about that quote. And I like to think about entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it's definitely creating something from nothing. And personally, in July, I would love to create sitting on a beach for a little while.
Me too.
But
Me too.
but I'm sure there's lots of people out there with lots of different visions for the future. So thank you so much today for your inspiring words, and hopefully some of them can bring that vision into reality. Before we jump off, any sort of final words for a future entrepreneur out there about maybe, why they should do it?
A bit of advice that is at least tied to me and seems to be common across many people that I talk to is, you will regret more the things that you didn't do that you wanted to do than the things that you did do and maybe failed at, depending on how you define fail. And I've learned very early on in my adulthood that something that I wanted to do but didn't stuck with me a lot longer. And so I knew personally that if I didn't jump into entrepreneurship and didn't try to build a company, that I would forever regret it. And I think that would make me a worse partner. I think that would make me a worse father. I think that would make me a worse person just to be around, because I wouldn't have pursued the fullest version of myself. Not saying that entrepreneurship has to be that pursuit for everyone, but I would say just do it. There's a lot of people that aren't as smart as you that just were brave enough to do something and they made it into something. I think, try it, give it a whirl. It doesn't have to be the end all be all. You may learn a whole bunch of things and decide it's not for you, but I would say with anything in life, try it. If you learn it's not for you, then at least you learned it.
Yeah. Oh, that resonates incredibly well for me, and I'm sure it does for a lot of folks out there in the world today. So thank you so much, Brennan, for jumping on today and sharing your insights on finding customers, raising funds, team leadership, and of course, that wonderful quote from the Fountainhead.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure to have you on the show, and this concludes the podcast for today, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Jackson.